like to start with a paraphrase from Aristotle. Clear speaking demonstrates clear thinking. And that's the topic of this video, clear communication, mainly through a three-part framework that I will be showing you. And the main idea of this whole video is that this is the way leaders communicate. They almost all communicate in this three-part framework. And I'd like to give you 3 tips to help you move in that direction. Now, the first tip sounds easy, but it takes a little work to get there, and that is to figure out what your main idea is. If you're writing a college essay, this is called your thesis statement. And as you probably know, it takes a little bit of work and reflection and a lot of crossing out and rewriting things to figure out how to say your main point in about one crisp sentence. That takes some work, but the extra effort it takes to get there will help you communicate much more clearly. So in any kind of meeting situation, conversation, presentation, email, voicemail, you have to figure out what your bottom line is. Tip number 2, once you have figured out what your bottom line is, you want to break that bottom line down into 3 main points or 3 buckets. You want to figure out what you want to say first, second, and third. And once you figure that out, you have a basic structure that you can communicate and offer. Now, if you're in a longer presentation or a meeting, you have to preview these ideas and then give some detail. If it's a short conversation or an email, you can just share them by listing them one at a time. So let's just assume for a second you've given your main point and then you've previewed your 3 main points across. You've given a little roadmap, first, second, third. The next thing you want to do is circle back around to the first one and signpost. Remind people that you're talking about your first point. Once you give all the details for that first point, you go to your second point and you say, secondly, and then you share your second point details. And then once you're done with that, you say third, and then you give your details under your third main point. If you only give your thesis and your preview statement, and you don't then remind people by signposting each of the main points, it's easy to get lost in all the details of those main points. So it's very important, if you want to communicate clearly, to give those reminders. They're called signposts. Little points along the way where you remind people, just in case they got distracted. Now I'm talking about my second point, and finally my third point. Now, I often get the question, why 3 main points? What if I have 10 things that I need to share? Well, if you're still stuck with a whole bunch of items, like 8, 9, or 10 items, chances are you haven't taken the time to step back a level and think about how you might sort these into 3 main points. We're going to remember 3. We're not going to remember 10. So usually, if you look at a list of 10 or so items, you can create slightly larger categories that you can bucket those ideas into until you come up with around 3 main points. Now, on any given day, if you have 2 main points or 4 main points, that probably doesn't matter. You always want to shoot for 3 though, and that's a good discipline and habit to establish. So let's give some concrete examples. A couple years ago, I lost about 50 pounds, and naturally, many people have asked me, how did you lose 50 pounds? And this is how I would answer. My headline was, I had a 3-part plan for losing the weight. First, I counted calories. Next, I exercised more. And third, I stayed motivated with a friend. Now, if this were a normal conversation, I would just say it like that. But if we were having some kind of meeting update, let's say, then I would circle back around, give my first main point again, the details, signpost the second main point, then give the details, signpost the third main point, and then give the details. But this was just a normal conversation, so I don't go into that. Let's give another example. Let's say you're going to do an update in your meeting, and the question is, how are things going in your meeting? Your headline would be, growth is great, but it's causing strain. First, employees are getting burned out. Second, it's been hard to hire new people. And third, quality is starting to slip. And again, if this were a meeting with more details, I would then add those details and give the signpost. Now, let's say you're visiting a physician and you have something wrong with your eyes, and you would say, doctor, what's wrong with my eyes? And after he or she examined you, the doctor might say something like this. You have pink eye, that's the headline. The causes are it's a virus and it gets in there from touching your eyes. Symptoms are it's red and get itchy eyes, as you can see. And the treatment are these eye drops that I would like to prescribe to you. So that's how this sounds when you give a nice headline and 3 main points. It sounds extremely clear, and the whole thing is built for your listeners so that it'll stick. Now, the third point I want to share with you is a tip about using this 3-part framework, not just for communicating, but for thinking and analyzing and listening. And here's what I mean. This is a tool not just for expressing yourself, but for processing the communication that you're exposed to. So let's say you're listening and you're in the flow of a meeting with some people at work or among some friends. I recommend that you start taking notes and trying to figure out what people's headlines are and what their buckets are. This is an extremely valuable analytical skill that'll help you distill the messages that you're hearing around you. You'll become an A+ listener for content almost overnight when you start doing this. So this is not just a way to express yourself like a leader and express yourself clearly. It's a tool that you can use to analyze and think more clearly. And if you're doing it when you're communicating and also when you're processing information, you'll really up your game and your skills in this area. So in sum, this 3-part framework will help you communicate much more clearly. You'll communicate like a leader and you'll start to think like a leader as well. In terms of your homework, your action that I'd like you to take, the very next conversation, meeting, email, voicemail, presentation, anything where you know you're going to communicate, I would like you to shape it into this headline and 3 main points and watch this become a habit over time. And I'd like to finish with a quotation by Paul Meyer. He says, "Communication is the key to personal and career success." So thanks, and I will see you in the next video.